Well, good afternoon, everyone. Meteorologist Michael Wilhite here, WilhiteWX.com. Wanted to bring you a forecast update and really start to focus maybe on the longer range as we get into the last half of December here. We'll talk about the period right around Christmas time, and we'll talk about when the cold is going to return. We're certainly in a much more mild pattern than we have seen right now. How long is this going to last? Well, there's some differences in the data, and we'll show you them. First off, let's just start by looking at the models, and I want to show you that we're looking at a pretty dry and slow week overall. We've got some showers around. It's Saturday the 15th of December, 2018 as I'm recording this, and we've got some showers around the lower Ohio Valley right now. Those are all gone, and we'll start to dry out as we go forward here a little bit. Let me click on the right thing, get this into motion here for you, and you can see as we go into, you'll probably have some lingering drizzle maybe on Sunday, but then we're going to head out, and high pressure starts to move in for the early part of next week. That's going to keep us sunshiny and dry for the most part. As you head in toward Wednesday night into Thursday, you have another front that's going to approach us, and this is the one that could be very interesting. As you notice what the GFS does, what it does, it develops a low pressure here, sort of on the base of this trough that's rounding down here. As it develops it rides up the front, and it brings us some showers. Notice the GFS is starting to deepen this trough, and as it goes, look what it wants to do. It wants to bring a rain to snow kind of setup. Now, it looks like it's an impressive thing if you're looking at it on this map here. It's really not all that impressive of a snow here on the GFS. It's rain to snow. Keep in mind, rain to snow setups generally don't bring us a whole lot of accumulation here in the Ohio Valley, on the order of probably under an inch. But it would be a little bit of accumulation if this is right. Now, the question is whether it's going to be right. It doesn't really have good model support at this time. Excuse me, folks, I'm fighting off cold here. Canadian sees a very similar thing, but you notice it's much more disorganized with it. The low is much weaker, so it can't wrap down as much cold air. Just remember with me that when you have a low moving through here, winds rotate counterclockwise around here. So what you're doing is on the back side of the low, you're pulling in wind down from the north. You can even see it here on these isobars. The low is positioned right in here, and watch as your wind direction is sort of down like this. So you got air coming down from Canada on you. The deeper the low, the stronger the cold that it can pour down, and it's not as deep as the low on the GFS. As a result, it moves through, and there's no rain to snow setup going on. It's snow as it moves on up to here. The Euro is saying a very similar thing here. So there's our weather moving out here on Saturday. We stay dry with high pressure in charge much of the week. As we go into the early, this is a little bit faster than the GFS. This is late Wednesday night into early Thursday. And you notice it does try at sometimes to hint maybe here in the Ozarks area. Keep in mind the elevation's a little higher here, so it wants to change some things over there. Higher elevations, you're going to have a little bit of a temperature gradient there that you don't have here in the Ohio Valley. Once this moves over, you just notice, though, it stays it is all rain, and it doesn't really until it pulls off to the east of us, and it starts to change it over again whenever you've got colder air up to more north than what we are, a higher elevation, things like this. You can start to get that, but it doesn't really have that for us. So right now, what the GFS is showing does not have really good model support. I want to just make that very clear. Could we have some rain to snow? There is a possibility of that. I would not rule that out, but it's going to have to be a pretty deep low. And right now, the GFS is showing a much, much deeper low, hence the snow factor on the back side of it that we don't have on the other models. And again, just to kind of give you an idea of the snow, we're not talking about anything significant here. It does give maybe, an inch and a half for parts of southern Kentucky, but for most of us, we're not really talking much more than a half an inch or so. At best, this is not a significant snow for us. GFS does have another little fast clipper system that could dump an inch or two on us after this. Let me go back and just sort of show you that after it pulls out. Then we've got Christmas coming in here. And so this would be Sunday the 23rd. And into that late night on Sunday night into overnight into the 24th. It does have a little fast-hitting clipper system moving in that could dump a little bit of snow on us as well. And then the GFS has another front as we start to close out the year, a couple more systems, and then, this one here possibly for New Year's Eve. Here's the 31st in the morning time, possibly with some snow as well. So we got an active period coming up. But the big question is going to be, can we get any of the cold air that is really being shown here on the models? And that's my sticking point at this. I think we've got an active time with plenty of signals to roll through, but I'm not so convinced that we're going to have the cold air like the GFS is showing here. And so I show you this to show you what the data shows, but also I'm very skeptical of whether that's going to be right. And let me show you why. As we take a look at the indices, let's get an indication. The indices can sort of tell us whether the cold air is available or not. So here's the GFS ensembles. Here's the AO, the Arctic Oscillation. Remember, when it's negative, that means cold air is available to come down further south from the North Pole and move into the south. It is negative, but it's not highly in the negative as you go through here. It's it's almost more neutral to just slightly negative and trending back towards the neutral as we get later on in time here. So really, if you have more of a signal like this as you end the month here, this is really more of a neutral signal than it is. If the AO was going down like this, that's a major cold, but we're talking more of a neutral signal here than we are anything with that. And so that means that we're not going to have a blowtorch in the sense that we're going to be in the 60s and 70s in major warmth here, but it's indicating to me also that you don't have a whole lot of cold air available to do that with you. And if we take a look at the 46-day EPS, which is the Euro ensembles, you're kind of seeing the same thing here. This goes out a lot further in time than what the GFS does. So the GFS sort of stops right around in here. But you notice that same time period, it's more neutral than it is anything here. But notice January just takes a huge nosedive. This could be some major cold here being modeled on this potentially. So there is some potential again, but we're just going to have to see. Even if you take a look at the East Pacific Oscillation, if you go back here, notice the EPO goes positive and even strongly positive at times here. Excuse me. As you go through the end of the month, an EPO that's positive like that indicates more of a trough around Alaska than it does ridging. A negative EPO is that classic big ridge up around Alaska, and that usually helps to pop a positive PNA that puts a ridge in the west and a trough here in the east. But when you've got a positive EPO like this, typically we find more troughing up towards Alaska, and that promotes more of a ridge or even zonal flow over us rather than troughing. So this would be an indication of more milder air coming in for later in the month as well. And so all that to say, if you look on the indices, there's not just a really strong signal for cold here. So I think any storm system that does come in probably is going to have to fight. And what you may end up, if you want snow out of these, you're going to have to end up with a very deep low pressure that's going to bring some storm-induced cold is what we call it. In other words, the low deepens up so much that it wraps itself up so tight it wraps cold air from the north and draws it in because the low is so cold. Storm-induced cold. Otherwise, there's not going to be a cold air source for it around. Now, there are some differences in the modeling, and I want to make that very clear as you go through here. So let me just back up. Here's the temperature anomalies in 5-day chunks from the GFS ensembles, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're headed. And as you go into the different periods here, you notice, well, it does start to cool down a little bit, but overall, this takes us through the 31st. We're talking the theme is warmth. But I want you to also notice that the models are very volatile right now. If we step back to yesterday's run of the GFS ensembles, it showed this, which is vastly different. It showed the warmer air to start off with, but as you approach towards Christmas time and right after, it's approached it as a much cooler pattern here as well. And visually, you can kind of see that if we just take a look. Well, here's the Euro ensembles, just to give you an idea of what they're doing well. And this is for Evansville, Indiana, the Evansville KEVV, the Evansville Airport. You notice as we end the month here, it's got a very mild pattern just on it here. That's starting to agree now on the GFS ensembles as well. But I want you to notice here, you've got a couple of cooler days in here, but overall we stay in the mid-40s to near 50s for a little while. We drop off a little bit, and then towards the end of the month, it wants to bring us back to that same pattern. But look at 24 hours beyond that, how much different the data was to end the month. It was much colder. With temperatures of a high of, 35 to 38, you could potentially get a storm where you could get some snow, because it would not be hard to drop that a few degrees below freezing whenever you realize that these are high temperatures for the day. But you have warmth where it's topping like 46 with the storm systems rolling. 46 is a lot warmer than 38 when you're talking a storm system. 38, you might be looking at a rain to going to snow sort of setup. 46, there's probably no way you're getting snow out of that. So all that to say, there's a lot of volatility in the model data here, and we're just going to have to monitor it. I will say this. Usually the GFS is pretty good at sniffing out a pattern change. It's just too quick with them. That's one of its model biases. Well, the Euro, on the other hand, is very slow at picking up the pattern change, and it's usually too slow to pick up on those pattern changes whenever it does. So you sort of look at both of them and you kind of split it as you're looking more towards the long term. So you've got model volatility here where you've got a very cold pattern being modeled, and then in GFS today, the ensemble starting to back off of that a little bit. It may be that the GFS is picking up on that pattern change, but it's just starting to back off on it because it was a little bit too quick on that pattern change. But again, as we went back and we take a look, at the, well, where is it? There we go. As we take a look at that data in here, and again, let me just show you the Arctic oscillation. Again, we looked at this a minute ago, but we stay fairly neutral until we hit January here. But notice again on the EPS ensembles what it does. It just takes it extremely cold in here. And so there is that pattern change. Now the question is, if this is too slow on the pattern change, could some of this negative be more like this instead of that, where it drops off sharper, quicker? Well, that's a possibility. We'll just have to see right now. I would say this. It's very questionable. It's a very low confidence forecast as we end December as to whether we're going to see much in the way of cold around it. For what it's worth, if we just take a look at the Euro weeklies here, it just toasts us and gives warmth even as we head into January. That's much different than what a lot of some of the other models are showing, and it does start to bring a cooler pattern in, but not until we start to end January. Again, if it's too slow on that, and I think it is, I don't buy this at all. I think it is too slow on that. And the GFS ensembles yesterday may have been a bit too fast. It may be that we end up with some milder air to mend the month, but as we begin January, we may end up with a little bit more of a colder pattern as we go beyond that. By the way, that may be an indication of what we get anyway. If we just sort of take a look at my analog data, and we'll finish on this. These were my final analogs that I built the winter forecast off of, just for reminder sakes. Here's what November was supposed to turn out. And then here is what November actually looked like. And that's about as close of an analog as you can possibly get off of this. The analogs did really well handling November. Now, all that to say, how are we going to go forward then? Here's what the analog suggests then for December. It doesn't suggest for us a very cold month overall here in the Ohio Valley. It suggests maybe a degree below normal. But not significant overall. And that's, with the milder air that we've got pumping in, we have seen some cold air. We may end up with something that looks like this, but here's what my ensemble data, here's what my analog data did as we head into our January, and it gave a very cold month on here. There's a lot of support, in the data for a very cold January and continuing that into an even cold February as well. So I don't really trust the Euro weeklies at this point. They've not had a great track record the past few months anyway, to be honest with me. I think they're a little too cold. I think January is going to be colder than what they show. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that we end December on a cold note like I was previously thinking. I had put some things out there on Twitter. The GFS ensembles were indicating that. All the data is pretty much hinting now that that idea is probably gone. And so we're going to not be toasty, but we're going to be sort of just bland through the rest of the month. That's not to say that we won't have anything to track. Again, as I showed you through the GFS, you just look at all these signals rolling through. So this is right before Christmas. This is next Friday, the 21st. And then you've got another weak system that may move through right around Christmas Eve. You get another front moving here around the 28th, one followed up by that around the 31st. So again, you've got at least maybe 4 things that might roll through here as we go from Christmas and beyond to the end of the month. A very active time frame, but it's big questions as to whether we get the cold air. And again, if we are going to do it the way the indications look to me, you're just going to have to get these to be stronger storms. Otherwise, you're probably looking at more rain than you would see snow. In fact, I'd probably bet on more rain at this point, and snow probably being the outlier, if I'm being honest. Now, as we head into our January and the cold starts to come back with a vengeance, that may be a different story. But if you want that big time cold to come back, probably going to be a little while before we get there. Well, that's it for this video update, this longer range pattern, folks. I'll have another one of these for you sometime down the line. Take care.